So here's my topic, second half, helping the hurting, which is the naked, the sick, and the imprisoned, or and that's for real. This is the stuff we're dealing with this afternoon. Grant was trying in those earlier ones. Grant was trying to present this idea of seeing the good in people, and especially in those first three ones where they are in states of good. You're trying. When someone drops a plate, your assumption should be they didn't mean it. They're embarrassed. How can I help them? Different process when someone picks up a plate and goes boof, and you watch them, and when they're like, haha, that was grandma's, wasn't it? Okay, completely different experience. We're going to be talking a little bit more about that side of things today. Okay?
I prefer.
So you're not talking about when they think it's wrong, but they're doing it on purpose. Is that what you?
No. Okay. This one is when they know it's wrong and they do it. This one is they don't even think dropping your plate is wrong in the first place.
And could I just add a small thought? We have to include the other category of people who are dropping their own plate. You know what I'm saying? Because sometimes when people are very hurting, they are hurting themselves.
Yeah, right. And we should probably, before we start, when thinking about this, say all of this is assuming someone who is fully mentally and emotionally competent. Yeah. So children dropping plates, you deal with completely differently from adults. Similarly, someone who is, triggered from abuse as a child, to pick an example, you don't put them in the same category as someone who just is mad at you and is going, right? There are lots of, we're assuming health, and until someone gets healthy, we are more working on mitigating external harm than helping them change themselves, because you can't help someone when they're not playing with a full deck of cards. Okay, you just can't. You can try, but how many of you have tried to help someone not playing with a full deck of cards, emotionally, it doesn't work. It just,
So maybe you're going to get to this, but does that mean that if someone's in a state of mind where they're sort of not themselves, then what you're saying doesn't really apply, and so that could really be any of us. We're not in the right state of mind to spiritually grow. We're not.
Okay, John made the statement, everybody is spiritually hungry earlier on. And he earlier on made the statement that everybody's spiritually hungry, and I agree. All of us are spiritually hungry. 100% of people are spiritually hungry, because you cannot live without food. You cannot live without drink. We're all spiritually thirsty. We're all spiritually hungry. But we also dip into those other ones. The thing that I would say about someone who is not fully in their right state of mind is there's a big difference between temporary insanity and permanent inability to see what's going on. Because, when you totally lose it, and you scream and yell and say things that are horrible, and then an hour later you're desperately ashamed and you're trying to make amends, that's a very teachable, fixable thing.
Right.
It's.
I was thinking of people who are chronically depressed. They really can't work on their spiritual issues much.
Right. Yeah, and so let me just say, because I hope we don't get too caught up on that one. It's really important. But I just don't want us to keep on saying, yeah, but on that one. So the thing that I would say is, yes, we don't know when people are spiritually culpable. Yeah. And so we need to be really, really careful at looking at someone and say, I know you did that on purpose. Okay, that is a deeply spiritually dangerous thing for us to say. We can say, by my misjudgment, it looked like you meant to do that. There's a qualifier there. And then the second thing is, when someone is doing harm to another person, our job is first to stop the harm, and secondarily to help the person doing the harm if possible. So if someone is not in a right state of mind, our first thing is to stop the thing that is harmful to the innocent person, and then secondarily, if we can, we try to help that other person. Does that tie in enough to what you were?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, good. Okay, so I'm just going to do a very quick run through of the three that Grant dealt with. Okay, so for the hungry, people who want good things, right? So what do you do for people who are hungry? They want goodness. If you do good to someone who wants goodness, it touches them, right? So someone who is feeling lonely and you go up and give them a hug, it, they melt into it because it just fills them. You can sometimes teach them about what is good. Okay? You've probably all been in a somewhat tender place and somebody gives you wonderful intellectual ideas and you're like, that is not what I needed. I just needed, I wanted love, or I also wanted teachings about the Lord's love. I wanted teachings about the Lord's protection. Things that are embracing in their nature, even if they are truths. Teach them how to do good and help them do good. Usefulness is the most powerful good that we experience. So if Avon is hurting because she is hungry spiritually, I say, Avon, come, let's go help Brigitte. That might be the biggest gift that I could do to Avon, because now she's experienced not goodness from me, but goodness from the Lord, because she's in the flow of the Lord's providence. And then teach them about the Lord. Okay? The Lord, anything we do about the Lord that is getting in touch with His love is helping them experience good. Thirsty, a little bit more obvious, right? The thirsty are the kind of people that you can just throw out all those ideas, because they'll just soak it up. A big thing with the thirsty is that thirsty people are self-learners. You can probably look around here and say, who are the people who take an idea and they run with it? Who are the people who say, wait, could you explain that to me again? They're not run with it people, they just want to have it explained to them. Thirsty people want to take an idea and run with it. So what you're doing is you're taking them to the source and saying, go, run. Okay, don't. And then another thing I'll say is encourage them to teach others. If you want to learn something, teach it to other people. So people, leading groups, people who are getting involved in doing leadership things, there's a thirsty component in that. I would say historically we've been really good in the church at dealing with thirsty people. Yeah. Okay? We're experts at this, right? Really, really good. Haven't been quite as good on the hungry people, but that's okay. We learn. Stranger, sojourner. I just want to play with this word. Stranger is a bad word because stranger has this otherness thing. Sojourner was someone who is not native to your land, who is living in your land. So immigrant is the closest that we have in this word, someone who is living here. So Erik and Grant are immigrants to the UK, and when we moved here, it was really nice to have people say, turning circle rules are pretty specific in the UK. It's not just get in any lane you want. There really are expectations of which lane you will be in. That's sojourner type stuff, right?
I'm helping in the roundabout.
Oh, you see, there you go. There you go.
So we know what you're talking about.
Exactly. And I had to learn that I don't say I'm sick, I say I'm unwell.
And pants different.
Yeah,
types.
pants. There's all kinds of.
Yeah.
There's so many.
Kids were really upset with
So
it.
if you think, but think in terms of what it's like to be entering a different culture. And now imagine moving to Korea. Okay. And what someone like that needs. That's what a sojourner needs. They need someone to, what was the word Grant used? Take them in, enfold them. Yeah, Karen.
Yeah, would you say it strikes me that that is also relevant for seekers who go into different spiritual environments and require that little bit of extra support while they're trying to find their place?
Bing. Yep. Someone coming to the all-age weekend for the first time. I get an example. That is actually one of the primary examples that the Lord gives for a sojourner, someone who is coming into the church and they don't know the basic rules. In our church we burst into song every now and then, spontaneously, and it could be a little bit mildly traumatizing to say, what just happened here? Everybody knows what happened. We don't even say the Lord's Prayer right. We say it different from everyone else. Wouldn't it be nice if someone took your hand and, explained it through it. So think about the stories in the Old Testament where someone comes in and someone says, "Can I take you into my home? I'll explain to you what happens here." That's the feel for the sojourner. And think about how practical the help is for a sojourner compared to the thirsty. Let's talk about the glorification. Might work for the thirsty. For the sojourner, it's, the songbook's over there. We don't pass the offertory basket. It's just at the entrance. You can give it if you want. It's much more practical. Giving someone the sense of, I belong here. We tend to have a big Thanksgiving meal. Do you want to come to my house, for harvest? Whatever. That was an Americanism, pardon me.
It's almost like an acclimatizing to the sphere.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and remember how Grant was talking about this is sort of the natural level. Think about it as just sort of helping that person on that external level, giving them their community. Yeah.
So I've been a member of the new church more than my 3 school years in 10.
Yeah.
I don't understand this singing stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody has ever told me where it comes from.
Yeah.
Nobody has ever said you can find them here. The words are there and all the rest of it. When people who've been to Bryn Athyn burst, I was talking to Sarah about this at lunchtime. When somebody bursts out and says, "Why don't we all sing?" And I go,
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not alien.
Yeah, you're British as well. Let's be honest.
As we think about the future of the church, and if we go national and online, are you going to be able to teach people to, come to teach the world to sing?
Yeah.
Can that be done online? It's an important cultural thing that sometimes makes people very uncomfortable because they just don't know what the norms are.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, in my ministry, I have tried to limit the social songs that we sing down to about 2 because that's teachable. The Lord upon you send a blessing and a glorious church. So that's about the 2 that I've ever done in my whole ministry because of exactly that experience. And they should be printed, and when we haul them out when we're going to do them.
Yeah.
The problem
Maybe
is
we
they
can
tend to be
have
wanted
song banks.
spontaneously. And is that a loss? Yeah, because some of those songs are gorgeous.
I can tell you they're at the back of the liturgy. If you want them, they're all in the liturgy. Not all of the social songs, but those ones are.
Those ones are, brilliant. Sue?
I think there is
Thank
that
you, Sarah.
sense that you don't belong. You're singing. I mean, I know some of them, not
Right.
all of them. And it's probably quite a simple thing if you're going to have a harvest supper, just to put a little, sort of put the words out with the plates or. But you are left feeling an outsider because you don't know the word.
And I agree. And isn't it funny how, for this conversation, boom, we got down to practicalities, right? When I don't know the words, I feel like an outsider. That's where sojourners are. If you say, in Greece, you don't go to a pharmacy to do this, you go here. That's like, oh, thank you. You saved my life. right? I don't know Greece from nothing, so I'm making that one up, but you get what I'm saying. And it's the same with being tuned in to someone coming here, coming into the church. Are we enfolding them? And that means becoming aware of why we do what we do. So, for instance, we tend to have quiet before our worship services. Did you know that's very, very unusual in most of the Christian world? So maybe that's something we need to explain if we want it, so that somebody doesn't feel like, what's going on? Carrie.
Yes, and also I was thinking you can't be aware of everything that everybody's not getting. So there's also realizing somebody's doing, saying, do you have any questions? Come to me if you're a little.
Right.
Because again, I know they've typed out, we have silence in church years ago when I went to Burnhouse Cathedral. They have started putting introductory.
But it's got to be personal. I'm going to give you the last word because we need to move on.
No, I was just going to go back to the singing business and making people feel they don't belong. My son-in-law, who's Brazilian, came to my church and we all did this spontaneous singing. He thought it was absolutely wonderful. He said he felt the love of the people coming across to him and it made him feel great. So,
yeah, and there's a both end, right? And as much as we can enfold people, the better it's going to be. And what John said, I've been here for forever and I still feel out of it. I've heard that phrase so many times and it's all about these little external things. Okay, moving on. Yeah, we've already done all this. Okay, the next three, Grant pointed out this. Hungry, thirsty, and stranger mean an affection for what is good and true, but one who is naked, sick, or in prison is meant a self-acknowledgement. And self-acknowledgement is the acknowledgement of oneself as being nothing but evil and falsity. Wow, that's kind of intense. What that means is acknowledging that at this point in time, I am in a state of evil and falsity. But the thing that I want to focus on is not that part. I want to focus on this word. It's about the recognition that I'm not in a good place. Okay? I'm recognizing that something in me is not working. Because if I think everything is fine, I'm not in that place, am I? If I think I'm allowed to scream and yell at you when you don't do what I say, I'm not very teachable. So that's what that self-acknowledgement is. The naked, sick, and imprisoned have some sense, not necessarily a complete sense, but some sense that something isn't right. Okay? Wanting goodness and truth, seeing evil and falsity and wanting to fix it. And that's why the title is Helping the Hurting, plates and stuff aside. Okay, so let's explore some of these, and I'll tell you up front, I'm going to spend more time on the naked, partly because it's one that's easier for us to do something about, and so it might feel like, oh, okay, I can start to wrap my mind around that, because you will know people like this, and probably you have been like this at times, okay? No, really, there you go. Clothe me with the garments of salvation. He has covered me with robes of righteousness. There's a lot of this language about the Lord's clothing being glorious and wonderful. When you think about being naked, what problems, in a public setting, what emotions, what problems come to mind? What are the challenges of being naked in a public setting? What emotions come up? Yeah.
Very aware of yourself.
Yeah, okay, that's right. All of a sudden it's all about me, right? None of you, okay. Yes, it's all about me, yeah.
I'm feeling very unsafe.
Unsafe?
Shame.
Embarrassment.
Cold.
Cold. Yeah.
Well, I would anyway.
What were you going to say, sir?
No, actually, my wife picked it up.
She good. Okay, good. Yeah.
You might be breaking the law.
Oh, yeah, okay. So there's another level of safety. Yeah. Have any of you had naked in public dreams?
Yeah.
It's a surprisingly common one. A number of ministers have preaching naked in public. Mine is actually...
You need to qualify that that's a dream.
Dream. Actually, my worst was trying to get from my parents' house in Bernathen, that they don't own anymore, to the cathedral, and halfway there realizing I never put any clothes on. Sort of running from tree to tree.
I can picture it.
Yeah, it's a really enjoyable dream. The follow-on is that my robes are yellow when I finally get them on, and I realize, nope, there's no end to the shame on this one. Okay, so these are some ones that I came up with, and I want to acknowledge, Eileen mentioned cold, exposed to the elements, but there's also just the lack of protection. Dave, you have to be way more careful than most of us when you go out in the sun, because you have a naked head, right?
How did you know?
You know, it's, I mean, everybody who's, you know, who has thin significantly, it's a huge thing, right? Because all of a sudden, this natural protection is gone, and it's a really big thing. And nakedness creates vulnerability emotionally. It also creates vulnerability physically. Here. I have these lovely little preview notes, so I know what's coming up, and I can't read my own notes. Yes, Sean.
But it doesn't seem to apply when, like, people are on holiday, like, and they go on the beach.
Oh, yeah, I know, you're right. And you're right.
And on nudist beaches.
Yeah. Okay, so when you are taking a shower, you are not ashamed, right? It's perfectly normal. When a married couple is together and they're not dressed, that's not a matter of shame. It's perfectly normal. So there are places where we can accept something as normal. But I bet, Sharon, I bet, maybe you have seen pictures of Victorian bathers and thought about what would happen if one of us came up wearing next to nothing. You know, those people would be having palpitations and, you know, yeah, absolutely. And it's very relative. In some parts of the world, standards of what's considered indecently clothed are really different from other places. So yes, it is a relative thing. It's contextual, and the naked here is describing when you, from your context, are insufficiently clothed, whatever that may be. Okay? So becoming aware of not having goods and truths in themselves is what nakedness, that's sort of the base level. So clothing is what we put on to cover our selfish desires. I want to say that nasty thing, I know I shouldn't, so I will clothe my desire to stick it to this person with truths that stop me from acting out on it. Okay? So we all have lots of negative emotions. Embarrassingly many, if we're honest about what goes on inside, and we use clothing to keep the line until, over time, the Lord can take away those inner desires and replace them with something more heavenly. And that's, for a chunk of areas, the majority of our natural lives. Only the celestial are naked in heaven, because they've gotten to the point where their inner self, they've allowed the Lord to purify it so much that they don't need that. Goodness and truth have become wed in them, and so they're able to be naked without it being shameful or lascivious or anything. Most of us aren't there. Is that where you were headed?
No, I was thinking that's why when I read parts in Swedenborg that talk about how you can't hide what you really are thinking and feeling in the other world. It's all on display. It gives me a shock.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, that's true. Yes, Sharon.
Also, like a deeper meaning to being naked is being true and authentic with yourself.
Yeah.
And with whoever you encounter or who you live with, because if you can't be that truthful and authentic with yourself, then you can't express that wherever you are or with whoever you are. So that's, to me, is like being, in a spiritual sense, being naked.
Yeah, in a healthy way, right?
Yeah,
yes, exactly. Spot on, spot on. And it's interesting that vulnerable and naked are used kind of interchangeably, aren't they? And there's a really healthy way that you can be vulnerable and naked, and there's a really unhealthy way that you can be vulnerable and naked. And discerning where to be is, yeah. Because sometimes you think, oh, I'm being vulnerable in a beautiful way, and then the person betrays the trust, and then it's, whoa. Yeah, yeah. Great thought. Go ahead, Carrie.
No, just a description of one of my sisters saying going to art school and where things are appropriate and not, and that whole atmosphere and whatever was, you know, you get your nude model and everybody's studiously going, and then they had some workmen come by and somebody whistled. The whole room, just nobody knows where to look. It just changes everything. So it's sort of that appropriate thing in what's going on in the mind and what the setup is.
Right.
It's
Sure.
so important.
Yeah, and probably a lot of us have been in medical situations where normal modesty requirements don't apply, and it's fine. I mean, it might be a little embarrassing, but you know, in the grand scheme of things, it's not that big a deal, because you know that the people there are not even slightly interested in anything. Yeah, it's just, there's a use in that. And, you know, I've got a son who's a doctor, so it's just, you know, we've had that kind of conversation. Okay, so some emotions. The naked is one where it's easier to tag the kinds of emotions that one might experience. So I'm going to give you a list, and I want to credit John Odener with naming these. He's really good at the let's get this down to brass tacks thing, you know, the kind of thing that you were asking a little bit. He's really gifted with that. Worthlessness often has a naked quality. I feel, you know, my value is just sort of ripped away and I'm just left there with nothing. Confusion. I have no idea what to do and I feel stupid. I feel stripped of the ability to do anything. Grief. Okay? Grief is a really important word. Or other things. We'll get back to grief. Remember that first phrase that I did, that the clothing was beautiful? The Lord wants us to have beautiful truths in our lives. The Lord wants us to feel like there is good, there is hope, there is purpose. Sometimes we lack that, and life gets pretty despondent, doesn't it? Okay? When we lack those beautiful truths, we can feel exposed to the yuck around us and vulnerable. Yes, Anne?
Is that why it talks in Scripture a lot about people putting on sackcloth?
Yes.
The black and ashes on their heads and that?
Yeah, and related to that, tearing their clothes.
Oh, right.
So they were like literally, to some extent, exposing themselves. You know, I don't think it would have been an indecent exposure, but another way of thinking about that is that I don't know how many shirts you have in your closet. If you were wealthy in those days, you might have, you know, 3, 4 pieces of clothing. If you were poor, you might have 1 set of clothes. So when you tear your clothes, that was something, okay, really significant. But think about the truths that are precious to you, and when you feel stripped away. We're going to come back to grief in a minute. All right, okay, so there I get to torn clothing, sackcloth, rags. So grief, shame, worthlessness, loss. Somehow you feel exposed, vulnerable. When I said I think we've all been here, are you recognizing this stuff? Like, this is really, really common stuff. Really common stuff. And people need truths that offer something uplifting, comfort, hope, affirmation of the Lord's love. And they need it in a way that isn't shaming. I'm not where I want to be. I wish I was in a better place. You know, when Grant was saying, you know, when the child drops the plate, yelling at the child for dropping the plate didn't help anything, because the child didn't drop the plate on purpose, right? And I think that we sometimes deal with ourselves also in that same way, and we deal with other adults. Like, hey, you should have known better. Well, maybe not. Sometimes they did. So I'm going to talk about different kinds of nakedness that the Lord describes. Going astray from ignorance. Okay? Doing what's wrong, not from malice, but from simplicity, just not knowing any better. Okay? So, any of you make really big mistakes as a teenager? Okay? Ones that you say, oh my, I'm covered in shame thinking about it. I bet you some of you have some really big ones. You think you were spiritually culpable for those mistakes? No, that's this category. You know, you were in a state of disorder, kind of stripped naked, but you didn't have the capacity to clothe yourself. So you got it over your head. Okay? I'm sure that maybe you at times and maybe others you see someone doing something wrong and they're not even embarrassed about it. You know, they're putting their hand into the till, and when you look at them, they're like, yeah. That's what everyone does, isn't it? They don't even see that it's an issue. There's a kind of ignorance and immaturity about spiritual things that can be really hurtful. I'll give you an example of one that's sadly common: fidelity in marriage. You know, the Lord's pretty clear that when you're married, you have to stay faithful to that person. There are a surprising number of people who actually don't believe that's a rule. And they look at you kind of funny if you say it is a rule. Okay, so they're stripped naked, they're going to be vulnerable to their appetites, but it's not from malice. It's really, and I'm going to be coming back to that theme, it's not from malice in the naked, okay? And part of the reason I want to pay some attention to this is that when we see someone doing something wrong, there are three categories. We're going to talk about each of them, okay? And this is the most positive one. So it's the one you should try out first, okay? First, I didn't even know it was wrong, didn't even think it was an issue. Then, going astray from faulty knowledge, okay? When we reason our way into stupid positions. Any of you done that? Yeah?
Is that a bit like people who are terrorists and they've been taught by their religion to go and kill other people?
Yeah, okay,
And
perfect
they're
example.
the right thing?
Yeah, yes, and probably they are also spiritually in prison, because that's, you know, when you start to get more serious, it goes that direction. But yes, it's that kind of thing where someone thinks it's glorious to go and set off a bomb and kill 50 innocent people.
Well, the children, funnily enough, they asked me about that. They said, Mum, how come, you know, look at terrorists, you know, they all do what they do and they think they're right. And I said, but if you watch them on telly, do they look happy? And they said, no, they look miserable. And they probably are miserable.
Yep. And to be fair, powerful nations that exploit developing economies and say, well, that's right, we're helping them. We give them jobs. But our real motive is to get money from them. Yeah. That's the same kind of thing. So yes, you have this justifying yourself. And the thing that I want to say that's specifically said is people trying to reason about spiritual things. In other words, instead of going to the Lord and say, what did the Lord say in His Word? They say things like, the Lord would want me to be happy, and this would make me happy, therefore I'm going to do it. Right? Anyone who knows logic know that I just made about 6 logical fallacies in that little pseudo-syllogism there. So these people can get themselves in trouble. And I bet you've done this too. You know, reasoned your way into allowing yourself to do something stupid and realized, ooh, I'm a little ashamed later on for what I did. If you start to feel ashamed, probably it's a good sign that nakedness is there, because it's not an accident that those two are present. So, then there's the whole, absolutely, we sort of already covered this. Absolutely convinced of ideas that you think are dangerous. That's the same kind of thing. Okay? So those are the two broad categories that I see the Lord focusing on. Nakedness because they don't even know the truth, or nakedness because some idea has stripped away the real truth. Third one is nakedness from harm done to us by others. Certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among thieves, who stripped him of his clothing and departed, leaving him half dead. This can happen to us too. So examples. Child abuse. A child is stripped of their experience of innocently growing up and given false, distorted views of what normal reality is. Think that's going to have massive impacts going forward? Yeah. And they may possibly be spiritually naked for the rest of their lives in certain areas. Just part of what can happen. Children raised in cruel or neglected homes, or homes with no spiritual values. Similar thing. Okay? They didn't have the ordinary experience of becoming clothed, and so they're left vulnerable. Probably to some extent, we all have some of this. People convinced of bad ways of living by friends. And have you talked into doing what's wrong? I was never. Some of you may have been. Another one I want to put out there is popular culture. Popular culture draws us into reality. So this one is just blowing me away, that the way in movies, sex on a first date is just normal in movies. That is really weird. It's really aberrant that that's a normal way of thinking, and yet it's become a normal way of thinking. Now that sounds like it could be a pretty harsh judgment if you happen to have been in that state. And I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about someone putting forward that belief to someone else. It's really harmful. Okay, I have some other examples up there, all about ugly things. And the thing about harm done to us to others is that there are always lies that go along. And lies strip us. Lies by their nature strip us of the truth. So think about someone who's been abused. This was my fault. Most people have some of that who were abused. And I'm picking the obvious one just because it's something that we can all wrap our minds around. I'm bad, tainted beyond hope because of what happened to me. Even the Lord couldn't love a person like me. Think about those lies and the way they strip you of so many fundamental truths. Even the Lord couldn't love me. Whoa. Think of the way a 6-year-old is supposed to be growing up. The Lord loves me. Mommy and Daddy love me. I feel safe. And when that's stripped away, and you get the idea. Lots of other ones, we don't need to dwell on it too much. And part of the nature of the lies was that people stripped naked in an area often act out in that very area. So the doctrines talk about the difference between being bald, which is a kind of nakedness, versus having your feet naked, versus having, etc. All the different parts, we're vulnerable in different areas based on different things. So children raised around violence are more likely to resort to violence. Isn't that shocking? You'd think it would be the opposite, right? But the reality is when we're stripped of a truth, we're vulnerable to those hells, and it's not our fault. We still need to deal with it, but it's not our fault.
Well, I beg to differ on
What?
that, because I think you might not, if you're raised in a violent home, you might not be violent, but you might accept that violence is
Okay,
just
so there's
not.
another way that it
So
might
that's
show
a
up.
bit, yeah, I think it's 50-50 actually.
Yeah, and you might actually unknowingly enter into relationships with people who are more likely to be violent because you're blind to the...
Or you're used to it.
Yeah,
You can
exactly.
deal with people.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so I already mentioned shame, but I just, some really, blessed is he who watches and keeps his garments, lest he walk naked and may see his shame. So there's everybody's dream nightmares, walking in public naked and people seeing your shame. Okay, shame is a really, really big thing. Adam says, I was afraid because I was naked and I hid myself. And the Lord said, who told you you were naked? Why did that matter? Well, okay, I'm into shame now. So I think people easily susceptible to shame almost always have nakedness issues. So if shame is one of your things, then probably you have nakedness issues. Shame's definitely one of my things. Just like I do not like that. You know, I'll make a mistake and I'm shriveling, Anne will make a mistake and she'll just laugh. And I'm like, how did you do that? Well, I didn't have the, I mean, she didn't have the thing going on that stopped the healthy reaction. In certain areas, I'm sure that Anne has her issues, but I just observed that. Shame leads to a disproportionate reaction, right? If I make a mistake, then I am worthless, rather than I made a mistake. Again, that's a nakedness response. And people who are naked, who feel ashamed, need respect. So you withdraw, you give them an idea and then you withdraw. You know, if someone is naked, I'm not going to be like, here's some clothes, and just sit and look at them, right? That would just be terrible. That would just be, you know, that would be like, you know, you'd like, here are the clothes, I'll be back. Okay? And the thing that I really want to hit with this is most nakedness is fundamentally about someone not doing something on purpose. They're often in a state of evil, not by choice or not primarily by choice. Okay? So that person who, just to go back to the earlier example, who was abused as a child and now is acting out in some of the same ways, you know, either, you know, take it with Louisa's qualifier in there. Yeah, there are choices involved in that, but because of the spiritual nakedness there, they may not be playing with a full deck in terms of their ability to make the kinds of decisions that are called for. And so there's not a full choice of freedom going on. And I think when we see people in those stages, then we need to assume the best, assume good intent.
I find that really hard.
It is. We're going to get to, I think we always need to look at good intent. And I think, John, maybe a place where you're going to is something that we all go to, which is, if they didn't mean it, then there shouldn't be consequences. And that's not what the Lord says. Even if they didn't mean it, there are sometimes consequences. It's just that there'll be a different level of consequences. So just in the law, if you are drunk and you hit and kill a passenger, a person on the road, with your car, you will be punished very differently from if you ran someone down. There's still a consequence in both ways, but one is a lesser consequence.
But some of these people have almost they're in hell in many ways.
Yeah.
Because they've taken so many decisions and they have chosen their future in a sense because of their love of, if I can use that word, their love of evil.
Yeah, right. And so we're going to get to the sick in a minute, which is the more intentionally choosing it. And that is more serious, and you treat that differently. Whereas the very nature of being naked is the thing that's the problem is you're lacking the covering, not that the body is diseased, if you will. Okay.
So some of the stuff that you were saying, so I don't want to derail your session, but some of the stuff you were talking about before, the first date sex, the porn, that kind of stuff, that's almost an addiction. So is that a crossover now because they are in a sense sick?
No. Spiritually speaking, it's not. Spiritually speaking, an addiction would more be in this naked or possibly in prison. Sick is when you're fully choosing it, knowing all the time it was wrong. That's a different situation. This will it is a lot less likely to send you to hell. Doing something in a state of spiritual sickness will send you to hell unless you fix it. Okay? There may be levels of culpability here, but there are a lot of reasons why it may not be. And that level of culpability is the key distinction. Okay? So I think that you're just anticipating me a little bit.
Sorry.
No, you're allowed to. You're allowed to, because these three do interweave. Go ahead.
Just a quick word. I loved what you said about the Celestials being naked. I'm mindful of King David rushing into the city, everything on display, and I think it was one of his wives who tried to shame him, and he didn't allow himself to be shamed.
Right, yes. The servant women will glorify me, because they, he said, look at my intent. And that... it's the same when someone... If someone is accidentally exposed, we don't say, oh, you wicked person, right? We say, oops, sorry, you must be embarrassed. Versus someone who deliberately manufactures a wardrobe malfunction.
There's that quality of innocence as well.
I agree. And David dancing clearly is an innocent thing. I want to hit on this one because it's a completely different kind of nakedness. The grief, the tearing your clothes. And then Jacob tore his clothes and put on sackcloth on his waist and mourned for his son many days. When we lose a loved one, when we lose an ideal in our own lives, when we have grief over poor choices, in addition to maybe being sick, we can also be naked. For a time, it incapacitates us. It strips us of our coping mechanisms. So temporarily, we can all be caught up in, when you have a big shock, when you find out that a loved one suddenly has died, most of us kind of go numb, right? Like we just don't know what to do. The ordinary, call your mom. Where would I find her number? Like even the ordinary things I don't know how to do because we've been stripped of the ordinary clothing that we use. And I think this is really important because we all experience grief. And grief has that quality of stripping us of our ordinary truths that we use. We become, as it were, incompetent compared to what we normally are. I've seen this so often as a pastor. People people are asked to make a decision. What color flowers would you like for the service? And the wheels just start spinning and they're like, I don't know. This tiny little decision feels traumatic because they don't have the tools. So it's a really important one to be aware of. Grief strips us naked. Be very gentle with people in states of grief. They don't know how to do what should seem like obvious things. They seem like obvious to you, but they're not obvious to them because they're processing something on a much deeper level. Okay? And we can't help much here except with comfort. Because comfort is a clothing. There's, teaching about associating comfort and clothing. I can't remember it. I should have it off the top of my head.
I can think of a story.
He gave me beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness. Yeah.
You know what just flashed into my head was the picture in the book of Revelation when the souls under the altar are mourning and praying for release, and the angels come and put garments around them. I don't know if it says garments or clothes, but or what, but I love that. I picture it being done with great gentleness.
Ultimately, with grief, the Lord's the only one who heals. Right? You can help, but you're mostly there to comfort. The Lord pours the oil on in the end. Advice is generally not useful to someone in a state of grief. In fact, it's often the opposite of useful, right? Okay. So what to do for the naked? Really, really, really important. Hold the right attitude. They're not doing this on purpose. They lack the tools. We'll get to John's one. You can sometimes offer tools, but seriously respectful way. You know when someone's offering you advice and they really respect your right to reject it, right? You know what I do in that situation, Alan? I would turn the computer off, leave it for 5 minutes, and then turn it back on again. I don't really, that's your knowledge. Use it the way you think is right. And if you say, no, I don't want to do that, I'm like, fine. We need to treat the naked with that level of respect. We give them the idea, but we respect their integrity. Experience, I think, is much more important for the naked. You know what I've done when I've experienced that before? So, both my parents are alive. I'm going to be less good at dealing with someone who's lost a parent. Some of you might be very good at that. Yeah, same thing. Offering experience is particularly good for the naked. Again, how did the Word help me? When I lost my mom, something that really comforted me was, all of a sudden now we're bringing the Word into life, which is a little bit more what John was asking for earlier. And then this is just a quick one. Be really careful about going after other people's half-truths. Okay? So,
what do you mean by that?
Okay. People sometimes want to give money, to the homeless people begging on the streets. The empirical data is that most of those people are using that money very poorly. Okay? But the impulse to help is really, really vital. And what we've sometimes said is, don't do that, that's really doing harm. And so we stifle the desire to help instead of saying, you know what might be a better use of that impulse is to do this. So we end up crushing a really good thing instead of helping them direct it properly. So that's actually stripping someone naked, in effect. And we can sometimes do that with doctrine too. Oh, no, that's not the right way of understanding that. And then you end up crushing someone's desire to even want to look at it. Ministers with too ready answers can sometimes do that. Oh yeah, he knows, I'll just... Sean and then Sue.
Where I live, every day I'm approached by homeless people who are asking for money. Some of them I'm sort of on friendly terms with, and intuitively I know they're not using it for good purposes. But then there's sort of this conflict of not judging.
Right.
So, for example, if I'm aware this, just as an example, no judgment, I'm aware this person is on drugs or alcohol, whatever, they're using this money for drugs and everything. But then on the other side, it is, we're not meant to judge, we don't judge. So,
Right.
so more than often I end up giving some money or some change, because it's like if I don't, rightly or wrongly, it feels like to me if I don't give, then I'm judging them.
Right, okay. So, yes, and I appreciate what you're trying to do is wrestle with what's the right thing to do here. You know, if we were to have a conversation, I might say, here's a thought to try help you make better judgments, but I really honor your effort to reach out, right? And holding that desire to reach out is of primary importance. Doing it the right way is of secondary importance. So you use the best judgment you can, and we can honor that, even if Andrew in the same situation might make a different decision in his desire to help. That doesn't make...
Yeah, I mean, I give money to homeless charities because they will be able to check who find their real needs. And sometimes when I busk to raise money for charity, people give me things like water or something, a bottle of water, because they think, oh, I don't want him using the money for something bad, and I get funny because I don't need bottled water. It's just anyway.
Yes, we would, somebody would ask him for money, we would possibly give us ask them for something to eat or drink. But my daughter and I, we came out of railway station actually in Purley, and there was a lady there, and she came up to us. Weren't many people about, and she asked us for £26.30 for a night in a hostel. And I don't think we actually had £26.30 between us. We don't carry a lot of cash. But we were left in quite a dilemma afterwards. Should we have given her that, or unquestionably, and would she have used it? And we've had many discussions around that ever since, really.
Yeah. Let me just offer just a one-line thought about giving to charities. Is probably, if we can, it's a good idea to pick an area or two that we have particular interest in and learn about that. So then we can have confidence that we're helping. And I also want to recognize that that's not the way some people roll. Some people just need to be able to give spontaneously. There's a lot to be said about giving to the needy, and we could spend the next 45 minutes at least. So I'm going to move us on, okay? No, really, there you go. The sick, and I mean this in the American sense, okay, the unwell, okay? So what does being sick mean?
Being in a disorderly state.
Yeah, being in a disorderly state.
In my experience, a lot of people who are mentally sick are very, very good at covering it up. So it's quite difficult to discern unless you really get to know someone.
Yeah, okay. So, yeah, good question. Okay. Actually, being spiritually sick is knowingly doing what's wrong. So this is getting back to what John was raising the question about, right? What if someone is doing it and they do it on purpose? You know, when someone picks up your grandmother's plate, who looks you right in the eye and goes, okay, you know.
I mean, it's a term we use when you know this. People use it, that's really sick.
Yeah.
Some things
we say
really awful and very
depraved.
Depraved.
We actually say they're sick.
You go,
we do. And I just want to do a language clarification, because psychology talks about being psychologically unwell as a kind of sickness, and we talk about it that way, and that kind of fits more in the naked category of I'm not playing with the full deck. Someone who is sick is playing with a full deck and does it anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, so when you looked at someone you actually care about and said something that you knew was untrue but you knew would hurt, that was an act of spiritual sickness. Okay? You were deliberately doing harm to someone else. And let's be honest, we all do this all the time, because if we didn't do this, we would not need any spiritual work. This is what we need spiritual work about, is because all of us at times, on purpose, do harm to other people, indirectly or directly. Okay? Deciding I can drive 20 miles an hour over the speed limit. I'm eventually going to hurt someone, right? You know, I might get lucky, but you know that was a deliberate choice to do something that I knew was wrong. That's a kind of sickness. And then think about, you know, when you have fevers. When we're in a sick place, spiritually speaking, we're often delusional. Like we think it's okay. It's okay for me to yell at my partner when they act this way. It's okay for me to tell lies about what I accomplished in my job to my boss, because that's just what people do. No. You know that. It's you know, all of us know it's not okay to lie to your boss. It's just not. So that is spiritually sick. Okay?
Is it okay to not give you all the facts?
Okay. Well, Raymond, it would depend, wouldn't it? Because
to be able to tell them and just have them not be judgy, just hear it.
Just listen.
Yeah.
Isn't it interesting how much just the confessional is a really powerful thing? Someone, I didn't have to pretend, and someone heard me. Yeah.
Wouldn't it also be helpful to be confronted by someone you really trust? Like, okay, this really is wrong.
Yeah. Right. If you have a repeated problem, you might give someone advance permission. Right? If you see me do this, I want you to call me on it. So I'll give you an example that happens with, say, someone who's an alcoholic.
Yeah.
You know, often the spouse will call up and say, I'm sorry, George is feeling unwell today. He can't come in. And eventually, when dealing with an alcoholic, you have to say, I'm sorry, George went on a bender last night. He's still passed out drunk on the couch. He can't come in. Okay, so that's an example of, I'm actually jumping the gun a little bit because that's actually imprisoned.
I was going to say alcohol isn't.
No, I'm sorry, I'm being a little too intuitive. But sometimes we can give people advance permission to confront. Or I have a little bit of a license to meddle because I'm a pastor with my parishioners. So I might go to one of my parishioners and say, can we talk? They always know what I'm there to talk about, right? You know, I mean, if they're in a state of disorder, they know why I'm there. Marianne.
Also, if you're in a state of disorder and you did something and you talk about it, I think I would need somebody to say, whoa, that's bad. Because if they'd say, oh, I forgive you, I would think, you don't know what I said and you're not listening.
Yeah.
I did this and I want you to acknowledge what I did. And then afterwards you can forgive me if you want to, but I still first need to hear that it was pretty bad for me.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. And if you go to Fritz to talk about the way you treated another friend, Fritz's forgiveness is not terribly important. No. It's actually his support in learning to make the relationship right with that other person. Because often the person we need to talk to is not the person we've harmed. We actually may need to talk to someone else first to get perspective. I'm feeling a little time conscious here. Okay, so first thing of our attitude, when we look at someone else who we see deliberately doing something wrong, we have to say, I've been there too. There but for the grace of God go I. There is nothing that someone else can do that we don't have some part of ourself that could go there. And it may be something that we would never do. I'm just saying, there's God, and then there's all of us down here. And the gap between the highest angel and the lowest devil is pretty small. And there's God up here, okay? we're all of us doing things wrong, and if we can hold that attitude even with someone who's being harmful, then we have a space of humility. Compassion. The Lord is often said to have had compassion. And compassion is within all of the Lord's dealings with us. All of the Lord's dealings. So if you are looking at someone and you say, I cannot have compassion for that person who did that, then you probably cannot help them. Because your distaste for that is going to be too much. And that's fine. You can't help everyone. Right? You know, all of us have places that we just can't go. I mean, it blows me away looking at my doctor's son. You know, if someone came up with a bone sticking out of his shin, he would say, oh, okay, I would be trying to keep down my lunch. Right? You know, we all have different skill sets and what we can deal with in other people. We have to be aware that when someone is deliberately doing evil, we cannot cure them. And I bet 99% of us have tried to cure someone that we love by force of will. It does not work. You cannot cure someone because curing them, their cure involves them taking responsibility for their lives. So all you can do is reach out to the best part of them and invite them to make the choices that they need. And that can be at the same time as you call 999 and say, you know, this person's child is in trouble, this person is a danger to themselves and society, this, you know, you still take action on the external level, but you have to look for the good. And here's something that's interesting. The Lord said, visit the sick. For the naked, you clothe them. For the hungry, you give them food. You can actually give them the solution. For the sick, you visit them. And we're told that we come to the sick sometimes with comfort, sometimes with a remedy. That's a quote. So often we just are visiting someone who's in a place of disorder, and we're supporting them. Not pretending it's okay, not saying, oh, yeah, okay, don't worry, it doesn't matter. No, you're saying, yeah, it does matter, but I'm here to support you. You can do this. You can overcome. You don't visit someone and pretend that they don't have cancer, right? That would be the ultimate insult. I'm dying of cancer, maybe, and you just pretended it didn't exist. But it's the same with someone who's in a state of disorder. It's no kindness to pretend it didn't exist. A little more in our attitude. Anything that can help someone turn to the Lord, because the Lord is the ultimate person who heals diseases. So talking about our own walk. When someone is in a state of disorder, part of what we can do is be vulnerable about our own states of disorder, because there's no shame in this, right? If I say to Dave, I had an issue with X, and Dave's hurting, he's much more likely to say, okay, maybe this guy has something that could help me. And should I be ashamed of being able to say I have issues? Well, maybe, but I hope not too much, because we all have issues. And I'm not likely to walk up to someone I hardly know and say, I have a huge issue with pride, and I'd like to tell you about it. I'm not going to do that. But I might do that to a good friend. I might do it to someone who I feel like I could help. Grant touched on this, right? And I think, Louisa, you may have mentioned this. Make sure you work on yourself first. Make sure you're not spiritually contagious. You can't help people if you're in the same place. And sometimes what shows up there is that your sister, mother, uncle may be the worst person to help you, because they may be still triggered with the same stuff. They may be dealing with the same heredity. They may actually not be able to get space. They may also be the best people to help you in different circumstances because they know exactly where you're coming from. They know exactly what lies you've given into and might be able to say, yeah, I know, I felt that. And you know what I think about that? So, just make sure we're not spiritually contagious. Truth is what refreshes and heals. So what truths have you lived that could be of service? So telling someone your own story. And where this shows up is we're often best at helping those who have similar issues to ourselves. Okay? Who's the best person at helping an alcoholic? Someone who's in recovery, right? Best person at helping someone who's been abused. Someone who's been there. Best person helping someone who's got a lying problem. Good deal. So, part of what we learn is who we can help and who we can't. And what's really, really hard is that when you are close to someone who has issues that are utterly foreign to you. I think that is just so hard, and it happens. It happens. The writings talk about generation skipping hereditary issues. So you could have a child who has an issue that you just don't even begin to relate to. And it's very hard to help them because you don't have the reflexes. It's part of what makes adoption a little bit more challenging because people can have issues where you say, I don't even begin to understand where that came from. So that's just a challenge.
Erik?
Yes, sir.
Somebody who's really sick.
Yeah.
Probably going to find it very difficult to start that process of turning to the Lord because they're not. If you're sick, you probably don't want to listen to that.
Yeah.
So getting that first step to work, is that not incredibly difficult?
It is.
Simple.
It is. And there's something about sickness. Like you probably do this, John. I know I do. When I get a certain kind of flu bug, I know that I'm down for about 5 days. I just know my body. It's sort of in the 5-6 day category. And the reason I'm giving you that example is that there's a time scope to something. So if your best mate has an affair and walks out on his wife, and you say, "Wow, that's pretty messed up," the chances of him hearing you there are about nil, right? One of the things that my dad says is, try about 2 years having a conversation with that person, because the insanity, the fever, may have passed. So I think that when we're helping people, often there's a fairly long arm, and that's dreadfully hard to do. To say, my best friend, I have to have on hold the way that I like to help him because I just know he couldn't hear. I agree. I think it's a very slow process, and that's part of the reason why visiting is the emphasis, because sometimes you just have to have enough connection with that person in their lives that when the opportunity presents, you can be a positive presence. And something that I also want to say related to that is who you are often is more impactful than what you say. So you hang around, you who loves your wife, hang around someone who's been unfaithful, and you stand for what you stand for. And if he crosses a line in conversation, say, George, I don't want to go there. You stand for it, and you're present. That's very powerful. That is bringing the Lord in, even if it's not, cognitively. So, but I agree, it's very tricky. Louisa?
Isn't it true that people often have to hit rock bottom before they can then want to get the help to get better?
What a perfect segue. To the imprisoned. Okay. Thank you. No, seriously, I'm really sorry this is going long.
No, it's...
Feel free to duck. Okay. So, spiritually imprisoned, what do you think this means? Grant already told you, trapped by falsity, right? You're trapped. Now, here's something. The 6 needs get more serious. Spiritual hunger is the best need to have. Spiritual thirst is the next best. Why is it worse to be spiritually imprisoned than to be spiritually sick? Spiritually sick is on purpose doing what you know is wrong. What is worse than that?
You can still get better when you're sick.
Uh-huh.
If you're in prison, nobody can get in there to help you.
Okay. If you don't even think something is wrong in the first place, how do you get better? Okay?
Yeah.
People who are imprisoned actually buy the lie. How do you fix someone who doesn't even think it's wrong?
Well, isn't it necessary to get to that state to be able to get better? So maybe it's a good thing for them to be in that state.
Right. And this is part of where you hit rock bottom, right?
Right.
You know, you live in the lie until everything crashes.
Yeah.
And there is dealing with people who are spiritually imprisoned takes an amazing amount of spiritual grit, because you have to let them crash and burn often for them to get there. So here, people are said to be in spiritual captivity when inwardly they're maintained by the Lord in goodness and truth, but outwardly they're kept in hell, by hell and evil and falsity. Okay, now that's one of the more optimistic statements. There are also times when people are imprisoned because they embrace the falsity because it gives them an excuse to do bad things. But I'm giving you this one because you may love someone who is trapped in a false belief system. And one of the ways that we can get some hope is having this feeling of, okay, maybe it's the belief system that's the problem, not them. Okay? So prisoners are trapped, and the other thing is they're missing out on normal life. Okay? Imagine your high school classmate who's been in prison for the last however many years since you graduated from high school. You'd have to, quadruple it. Okay? Imagine someone who hadn't experienced, we just had our 40th reunion, the last 40 years of life. They would have such a distorted view of reality, wouldn't they? Any of you seen The Shawshank Redemption?
Yes.
Okay? And it shows Morgan Freeman coming out of prison. He'd gone in before there were cars, and he comes out after there were cars, and he doesn't know how to deal with it.
Right.
Being imprisoned is a false reality. We don't understand what is. So ways we can be trapped in prison, I'm zipping. When we buy into spiritual heresy, out of pure ignorance, sometimes we can be trapped. Remember I said nakedness and imprisonment can overlap? Not being useful is a kind of trapped. People as they get older say, I feel trapped by this body that won't let me be useful, and they get depressed. It drags you down. That's a kind of imprisonment. Denial. No, this isn't wrong. Everybody acts that way. Justification. And here's a final one. Every time you experience temptation, you're in prison. Because the nature of temptation is the hell's attack, and they contain your ability to respond. And when you fight back, feeling like you're just about to drown, then the Lord can rescue you. But all of us, again, experience imprisonment, because temptation has that. Okay, moving fast. Come to them. Sometimes you're just present. Have any of you visited someone in prison? Yeah, okay, yeah. It's a very depressing place to go, but it's a very powerful place too. Ray Silverman's done a lot of work with people in prison, and he's been really impressive what people have at least written, and I think subsequently done with their lives. You can help people, but a lot of it's just showing up for them. Speak the truth even when it's hard to hear. So a lot of times I've been speaking about working within what they can hear. For the prisoners, sometimes you say, George, I know you don't want to hear this, but here's reality. Okay? So this is the prophetic thing, the intervention. You know what an intervention is? For an alcoholic, when you have an intervention, you get every single person in that person's entire life all their family, all their friends, their boss. You get everyone and say, you need to go into a treatment clinic right now, not tomorrow, in 5 minutes. There's a car outside. It's a last-ditch effort to save their lives. Sometimes people in prison need that all in, but when you do that, you burned all your bridges, right? It either works or it doesn't.
You might not have burned all your bridges, but you've definitely
You burned a
set
lot
that,
of them.
you've set that in motion, you can't take it back.
Yeah. And for that to work, it's got to come from love. You probably all experienced the prophet who was saying, "You sinner." That's not what this is describing, right? It's got to come from love. With prisoners, we often share reality. No, that's not how you treat your wife. It's just not how you do it, right? You know, you're just sharing reality. That's not how you treat someone you love. And something else I'd say is you encourage people to work with the truth they do accept rather than help them work through their falsity. Remember, you can't fix someone. You know, we've all tried to do this. We try to reason, you know, Patrick, you know what I see is faulty about your thinking? Blah, 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 blah. How likely is Patrick to accept my lovely little pithy solution? About 0, right? People just don't do that. What you can do is say, well, what are truths you accept? Oh, yeah, you know, Patrick, that's a really good idea. I like that one. I think that's a really brilliant idea. I'd love to see you apply that to this area of your life, because you're pretty smart. That might work, right? Okay. Okay, and then my summary ideas, and all of these, if you're not coming from compassion, you're sunk. If you're not coming from humility, you're sunk. If I were in the position, what would I want someone to do for me? Really, really useful thing to think about. And although teaching the truth is often the focus in this whole series, all 6 classes of the Neighbour, teaching the truth, often it comes down to sharing our experience. So in other words, the truth as it shows up in our lives, not an abstract doctrinal principle. Which is why often I would say try to distill it into, when I have dealt with this, what I have found is. And I'm going to stop. Oh, don't pass by on the other side. That's my final thing. Just watch it, because I'm sure we've all left people to drown. And it would be, you know, and that's sad. Okay, that's it. Sorry I went so long.